ladies and gentlemen, really nice to be with you, and my pleasure to share the Patriot story. And today I'm going to share a couple of key threads with you that I hope ultimately describe why the work that Patriot is doing and the benefit of our Shagajuwanan project, and I'll come back to explain to you Shagajuwanan, makes sense for the North American and European markets. There's kind of two key themes here to impress upon you. Firstly, the significance of what's being discovered by Patriot. It is really amazing. And as much as Pilgangoora, is close to my heart and a fantastic project, actually Shagajuwanan is more like Greenbushes than it is Pilgangoora. And I'll hit the high notes as to why I think that's the case. And then lastly, a bit about, it's confusing. The poor old people looking at the lithium world, just imagine, and equity markets, and imagine, I'd imagine the worst. But I want to tell you a bit more about the construct of the market and why actually we should still be really optimistic about the opportunity in the lithium world. And of course, it all centres around China, and I'll get into a little bit more detail there. So Shagajuwanan, it's a silent K, it's a G, and it's long. And of course people come back and ask us and say, well, what does this all mean? Well, it's the name as recommended by the Cree, the key First Nations, the only First Nations in the James Bay region. And who are we to say that that's not the right name for the project? It's fantastic. So at the very least, it inspires a conversation about Cree culture and Cree language. Climbing a hill, or hills if you've got the double A at the end. That's what it's all about, and we are absolutely embracing the Cree story as part of our development opportunity, and we're happy to have them along for the ride. So let's get into it. We've just announced a resource upgrade, and it's really important because you have to go through the process of discipline and infilling for the purpose of the feasibility study, which is now in its early stages. We're not far away from presenting our PEA and scoping study. And it's huge. But the thing about Shagajuwanan is it's not just huge. It's also high grade, and subsets of it are very high grade. So if there was ever a project for the times that we exist in today, it would be Shagajuwanan, because not only can it be a very, very large-scale mine that's going to help underwrite the lithium-ion battery supply chain in North America and in Europe, you've also got the option of mining very high grade. And everybody knows the Greenbushes story. It's the world's premier hard rock mine. Well, there's subsets of what we've discovered to date that look a lot like Greenbushes. So it's big. It's grown in the last 12 months, a lot more drilling, so we're up to 142 million tonnes. But from our point of view, the big ticket in the win in all the drilling that's gone on in the last 12 months was to get the resource upgrade. So we're north of 80 million tonnes in the indicated category. And that's what's going to largely underwrite the feasibility study that's now underway. But there is masses of exploration potential, and in many respects, Patriot has just started at Shagajuwanan, but it's already huge, and it's already high grade. But is there a chance that there is still some major discoveries to be made on that key ground? The answer is categorically yes. And we've tried to encapsulate that in the exploration target announced this week. So yes, it's already big, 140 million tonnes. But when you add the exploration target, the endowment grows to between 300 and 400 million tonnes. And as you can see, it's starting to look a little bit more like a Pilgangoora story, but I would argue even potentially a bit more like a Greenbushes story. So there's a lot more work to be done. Now, how do you end up sitting on such great ground? Well, you've got to hand it to the team at Patriot in the early days. When nobody else was paying attention to lithium back in 2019 and 2020, they were securing the key ground along that key greenstone belt now, so it's about 20 kilometres long between CV4 and CV12. And we've got a lot more work to do. So in parallel to our development story around CV5, we've still got all this exploration potential, and we are really excited about the potential to show more significant discoveries. But what do I mean by high grade? Well, there's 142 million tonnes in the total resource to date. But for the nerdy geos, you know, you'll get this, you'll go to the cut-off grade analysis, and you'll work it out pretty quickly. But for the mining engineers, I'll just give you the answer and cut to the chase. If you run a cut-off grade in CV5 at 1.4, and if you run a cut-off grade at CV13 at 1.2, there's 60 to 65 million tonnes at 2%. And then, you know, you stretch it down again, you go into CV5 in detail, the Nova Zone, really high-grade cigar within the cigar of CV5, big fat pegmatite, and you've got about 25 million tonnes at about 2.7%. That's what I mean about what's different about the Shagajuanan project and the potential in the ground. So it's already big, yes, it's big, and it can make for a big, long-lived, multi-decade project. But should you choose to, of course, there's materially higher grade to mine. Now, for those of you that were paying particularly close attention to the resource, you might have noticed that we've also now included underground resource. And I guess when I'm honest and I take a good, long, hard look at myself, I'd say I'm going to eat humble pie. We've been paying a lot more attention now to the underground potential at Shagajuanan, principally driven by this grade. If you can get into that high-grade Nova Zone and you can pull forward those tonnes, obviously they're worth a lot more to you. So that's a really important part of our thinking about mining strategy and how we're setting up for the future development of the project. So it's big, yes. It's going to make for a big project, definitely. But subsets of it are incredibly high grade and typically much bigger, even at a higher grade, than a lot of what you see in the world of hard rock lithium. So it's one of the good ones. To ram that home, we've just made a new discovery at the end of our winter program at CV13. We've struck across some very high grades, so there's not many mines, hard rock mines around the world that can pull out 35 metres at nearly 3%. But we're seeing that now in the Vega zone in CV13. Yeah, very, very high grade, and again, a new discovery. It sits beyond the original CV5 maiden resource, and we've got a lot more work to do in this area to continue to tease out its potential. Why do you end up with such high grades? Well, it's a little bit like think of it as a bit like the sort of nuggety gold story. When you hit the spodumene at Shagajuanan, you end up with lots of it. And that's why you get incredibly high grades. If you've got a pure spodumene crystal, you can get just north of 8% lithia. And a lot of what we see in our high grade zones is in the range of sort of 2% plus. You'll often get 15 metres at 4%, for example. And the reason that's happening is because of the population of those very, very large spodumene crystals. And that contributes to simplicity in processing, so DMS only. That's going to be our development strategy. Simplification and ultimately lower CapEx and lower OpEx. As much as we're in central Quebec and it's remote, we are not remote from infrastructure. Key to any mining development, of course. So we're 17 kilometres south of the Trans-Taiga Highway. That's the highway that connects central Quebec down to southern Quebec. We're 40 kilometres south of one of the largest hydro dams, being LG4 massive power infrastructure, including step-down transformers to the power that we require, and a massive airport that supports the hydro development. So big ticket infrastructure, big roads that were supporting 100-tonne loads through for the construction of the hydro scheme, and just so happens you have the Shagajuanan structure and discovery not far from all that infrastructure. So we're very, very fortunate there. A question that often gets put back to us, but what about mining in Canada and how long is it going to take to get your approvals through? Well, I guess a key lesson coming out of the time that I've been involved in the company, but especially in the period of time I've been living in Quebec, it is a sophisticated project development process. It's well structured. The Cree are well led. They're deeply integrated through the treaty that was signed with the province of Quebec to the approvals process. So you have a one-stop shop. It's well structured, and there's a clear path. And in fact, there's also remarkable track record. In the last decade, the Renard Diamond Mine was approved in 11 months post-submission of their ESIA. So those that complain about Canada, take a longer, harder look at Quebec and the James Bay region, because it is about as good as it gets. I would say French-speaking WA. That's basically what it is. It's a good place to be doing mining. It's culturally diverse in mining. There's good skill base. There's a good track record of project development and approval, and especially in the James Bay region because of the effect of the Cree process. So, yeah, I really like it. And you shouldn't be pessimistic about the progress of those approvals. Well, in our case, what does that translate to? Well, it translates to construction from the second half of 2027 and production from the latter part of 2028. Okay, moving on to the markets. Tim, it is fantastic that you're sitting here. Our friends at Canaccord, actually it's going to sound like I'm pissing in your pocket now. I reckon the Canaccord team has taken the right sort of critical lens and run that over what China is up to really in the market. And in this example, I'm just using it as one example. We're looking at Zimbabwe and the good work that Tim did there. And what I want to call out is the way that China behaves and the reasoning behind what they do. I'm going to speak in generalisations. There is always exceptions of really good performance and long-standing successful mines. There is definitely those. But that's not the general outlook in where China has gone to support as big a growth in supply as they possibly could in the shortest possible time. Now, what does that translate to? In my view, that translates to a bit of rip, tear and bust. Not really a solid plan, and typically not getting into the world's best resources. In fact, I would go as far as saying China has virtually no competitive advantage in lithium raw materials. They don't. And what they've developed is typically not that great. The West has some fantastic resources, definitely, either already in production, of course, shout out to Pilgangoora and Greenbushes, but a lot of what they've developed looks nothing like that. It's building out the right-hand side of the cost curve, and I think they're a bit of a flash in the pan. They come and they respond with this supply, and then they go, in a whimper. That's the story in lithium raw materials. In this case, in this current market, it's all about what China did with respect to inspiring supply. But should we be critically running our eye over what they've developed? The answer is yes, and it's typically not good. At least not good for the purpose of their long-run, low-cost supply. In fact, it's the opposite. What it's actually doing is building out the right-hand side of the cost curve, and you could reasonably expect, actually in the long run, higher lithium prices for the longer run because of the effect of what's been built out on the right-hand side of the cost curve. So another soundbite. Lithium raw materials developed by China, lepidolites and pedalites, are highly likely the magnetites of the iron ore industry. That's actually what they are. And in the long run, what's happened in iron ore, as much as the Pilbara can deliver to China for, let's say, 45, 50 bucks a tonne, the price has struggled to fall below 100. Why? Because they underwrote domestic magnetite supply, which is really not that great, at least not compared to the capital that could have been deployed in other great projects around the world. I hope that makes sense. So on the slide, Zimbabwe, just one example. What you see and what you hear, at least in the short term, is not the real story. The real story is those costs are materially higher than as currently promoted in today's world. The effect of that, in the end, longer run, higher pricing, in my view. So that's one example. That's the supply side. Now on the demand side, it's equally true. China's got a phenomenal position in the lithium ion world now. Zero competitive advantage in raw materials, but a massive competitive advantage in just about every other segment of the supply chain downstream. So chemicals, cathodes, cells, and I'd argue now cars. That's where their competitive advantage is. And have a look at what they've done. So the two key graphs that I've pulled out of Bloomberg New Energy here is what's happened with respect to cell cost. LFP cell costs have halved in the last 12 months. They've halved. It's unheard of. And in fact, they're now approaching about, at a sale price basis, $50 a kilowatt hour. When I first started in the industry, the holy grail for lithium-ion cells was $100 a kilowatt hour. And here we are, it's only about 10 years later, they're half that. And part of that is because raw materials are cheaper, for sure. But that's not really the whole story. The whole story is how hard China's gone to build out economies of scale. And margins have been squeezed, for sure. And all those things have contributed to lower cost cells. So what's the outcome? The outcome is the addressable market in the lithium-ion battery world is ballooning. It is absolutely ballooning because the cells are getting so much cheaper and so much faster than anyone imagined. And that translates to the next wave of demand, which is what we should all be looking forward to. Another example that highlights this point I'm trying to make is to say, have a look at what's happened to the cost of EVs in China. Again, because the cells are getting cheaper, it's now economically compelling in China to buy the EV because it's cheaper than the internal combustion engine car. Now in the West, we can only sort of dream of that today, but they're already doing it in China. So is China going to steal market share off the West just about everywhere else around the world where they can? Of course they will. Of course they will. That's the future. That's why we can be optimistic about demand, and I've also told you why we should also be optimistic about price. It just so happens that the supply side is winning today, but it doesn't win for long, given the demand growth that's going on and the speed with which those cell costs are dropping. All right, I hope that's made sense. The last thing that connects all this together is to say Patriot and our Shagajuwanan project is an absolute no-brainer now for competitive advantage going into North America and into Europe. Of course there is growth going on. I mean, as much as everyone's a little bit pessimistic about EVs today, you don't have to worry about that over the course of the next 5 years, roughly in the period of time that we're developing our project, because it'll be compelling to buy an EV for just about everybody. I know that's hard to believe today, but that's the trajectory that we're on. Fortunately, the Koreans are already agreeing with us, and they're going about and building a whole heap of gigafactories in the US. They're either under construction or already commissioned, and they have bugger all IRA compliant material. Perversely, one of the few IRA compliant projects is actually Pilgangoora going into Korea with POSCO to then feed North America. It's one of the few globally that's actually able to achieve IRA compliance. So what do we represent? Well, at our project, we represent the future underwriting of that supply chain, because we've got a massive project that can be attached to multiple chemical plants to facilitate the growth that's already going on there. And of course, it has the opportunity to be IRA compliant. So, I hope all that makes sense. What do we do from here? Well, we keep exploring, and we're well funded to do so, because there's going to be a lot more discovered at Shagajuwanan. It's an amazing project, and some of it's going to be very, very high grade. I hope I've been able to impress upon you that point today. We continue to push the development story at CV5. We have lots and lots of engagement going on with the Cree, and the Cree, fantastic counterparty to be working with, and a very sophisticated system in Quebec to support your mine's development. And we look forward to making that happen as soon as we can. Thanks, Tim.